It was barely past midnight when I pulled into our driveway, the engine of my rental humming low as I cut the headlights and stared at the house I'd lived in for nearly a decade. Every shingle, every patch of grass, every single piece of siding whispered familiarity, and yet it all felt foreign. I hadn't planned to return 2 days early from Houston. The client meetings had wrapped up faster than expected, and a storm grounded half the outbound flights. That's what I told my boss anyway. The truth was, something had been gnawing at me for months. It wasn't paranoia. It was quieter, deeper, a kind of stillness where suspicion slowly morphed into clarity. Inside the house, the first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was the air. Not stale, but lived in, as if someone had moved through it not long before me. My suitcase thumped softly against the floor as I passed the living room and headed upstairs. The bathroom light was off, but a thin glisten on the tile drew my eye. 2 towels, one mine, one hers, except one of them was still damp, draped awkwardly over the side of the tub, with creases I didn't leave. I stood frozen, heart beating slower, heavier. Rachel wouldn't use 2 towels, and no one else should have been here, at least not while I was away. Later that night, I opened her laptop. It was an old habit from before we had Logan. We'd sometimes use each other's devices without thinking. I knew her browser would still auto-login. Nothing much at first. Shopping sites, email, social media. But one open tab blinked like a beacon in the dark. A downtown hotel. The Halden. She and I had never stayed there. It was boutique, upscale, the kind of place people went for one-night escapes or secret rendezvous. A single visit would have raised my brow. But five? 5 visits, including just 3 days ago? My pulse slowed to a cold, eerie crawl. That's when the idea began to take shape. If she was sneaking out, I had to catch it on camera, but not in a cartoonish, slapstick way. No staged confrontation or middle-of-the-night stakeout. I needed something subtle, invisible. So under the excuse of checking the alarm system, I installed a compact camera above the back door, one that synced directly to a cloud server with a motion trigger. If anything moved between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m., I'd know. For a week I waited. Every morning she claimed to be hitting the gym. Every morning I watched her leave. But Friday broke the pattern. At exactly 6:03 a.m., I watched Rachel slip out the back door in yoga gear. But instead of jogging down the block or heading to the gym, she walked briskly down the street and climbed into a white pickup. A man waited in the driver's seat. He was clean-cut, lean, and young. He wore a dark hoodie, but as he stepped out to open the door for her, the outline of military dog tags swung briefly from his neck. I rewound the footage again and again, barely breathing. That night, after she was asleep, I pulled up her bank transactions. $600 cash withdrawals once a week, always from the same ATM near a strip of older apartments. Same time, same day, for the past 2 months, every Saturday. It didn't take long before the pieces snapped into place like a cruel jigsaw puzzle. The next day, while picking Logan up from baseball, I ran into Dave, our next-door neighbor. We exchanged small talk until he chuckled and said, "Saw Rachel walking the other morning with a young guy, military-looking. She training someone for a race or something?" I smiled thinly and shrugged. "Probably." I waited until the weekend. Rachel said she was visiting her friend Claire in the suburbs. I told her I was taking Logan to see my parents. That was a lie. I drove straight to my folks' house alone, unlocked the old safe behind Dad's workbench, and emptied it. Passports, marriage license, cash reserves, even the deed copies and Logan's birth certificate. Every document that could be used in a courtroom or a custody hearing went into my briefcase. I knew what was coming. When I returned that night, I didn't go home. I picked Logan up from practice, texted Rachel that we were grabbing dinner and might stay overnight at my brother's. She sent back a heart emoji. I took us to a motel 20 miles out. He watched cartoons, ate fast food, and never asked why we weren't going home. I didn't have an answer for him. Not yet. What I did have was resolve. Because even though I hadn't told Rachel I knew, every move she made now would be a trap she set for herself. And I was laying groundwork not just for confrontation, but for escape. Something quiet, irreversible. I just needed time. By then, I already knew the man's name, and I knew he wasn't just a fling. because in the Notes app of her old forgotten tablet, buried in a locked folder she probably thought I'd never find, were the words that kept me up for the rest of the night. New apartment? With Alex? By the time the sun rose over the motel parking lot, I'd already brewed 2 cups of hotel room coffee and stared at that message on Rachel's tablet so many times the words had branded themselves behind my eyelids. New apartment? With Alex? I kept hearing it in her voice, the breathless way she used to whisper plans for the future when we were still building this life together. Now it was weaponized, hollow, something whispered behind my back instead of beside me. I watched Logan sleep, arms thrown over his head like he was stretching into a dream, innocent, untouched by what I'd uncovered. I knew I had a duty to keep it that way, no matter what came next. That morning I began phase 2. First, I purchased a prepaid SIM card under a fake name and inserted it into a burner phone I'd picked up weeks ago, just in case my suspicions proved true. Then I created a profile on one of the dating apps Rachel had once said she could never understand. You know, the swipe and ghost types. I filled the profile with the kind of photos and stories I knew would catch her attention. Subtly wealthy, emotionally misunderstood, a well-read man who just needed a wild woman to set him free. 2 days later, I got the hit. Her photo appeared, Rachel calling herself Mel, in a low-cut top and her hair tousled like it was styled for a magazine cover. The bio sealed it, still figuring out where I belong. Not looking for anything serious. Unless it finds me first. I matched with her immediately. Over the next few nights, while Rachel made excuses about working late or decompressing with wine and her shows, I chatted with her as the stranger she wanted. I crafted my responses carefully, emotionally open but distant enough to keep her wanting more. I asked questions, prompted confessions. She took the bait. Before long, she was talking about her suffocating marriage, how her husband didn't understand her anymore, how she wanted to start over but wasn't ready for a fight. Then came the line that made my stomach twist into knots. Sometimes I wonder what it'd be like to build a real life with someone who lets me be myself. Alex gets it. Alex. There it was again. I suggested we meet. She agreed. Friday night, a wine bar downtown. She said she'd wear red, the color of freedom. I laughed bitterly. That night I arrived early and took the booth in the back. The waitress came by twice before she walked in, and when she did, I saw her confidence falter the second she recognized me. Her jaw clenched. I raised my phone, pressed record, and watched the lies collapse in real time. I didn't say much, just enough. Enough to remind her I knew, enough to show her that I wasn't guessing. I was certain. She stumbled through excuses, but I kept the camera rolling until she finally got up and left, knocking over a half-full glass of rosé. I stayed until closing, just to make sure she didn't come back. But I wasn't done. I had the recording, but I needed more. Real evidence. Paper trails. So I hired a local tech specialist, an ethical hacker who knew how to slip through the cracks without leaving fingerprints. Within 2 days, he'd breached the weak point in our Wi-Fi and accessed her cloud backups. Photos, messages, call logs, even documents. That's how I found out about the loan application. Her and Alex, trying to buy a unit on the edge of the city. I recognized the address. It was close to the ATM where she withdrew those regular $600 cash bundles. I even spotted a scanned copy of Alex's ID. He was younger, Army Reserves, and drowning in debt. That changed things. If Alex was desperate, he could get reckless. And if Rachel was financially involved, then she was taking risks that could legally expose Logan and me. I decided to push the situation. I created a second identity, this time a broker. I crafted a fake investment opportunity that would appeal to someone in debt. Fast returns, anonymous backers, no paperwork up front. Through casual contact, I lured Alex into handing over just enough personal information to track his bank activity. He bit without hesitation. The guy was financially bleeding and saw me as a lifeline. What I saw was leverage. While that was unfolding, I requested a formal report on our property. Rachel and I had owned our home jointly for years, a 70-30 split in my favor. But 2 weeks ago, without my knowledge, Rachel had mortgaged half of her share to secure a personal line of credit. The signature authorization had been forged with a digital approximation of mine. It wasn't just betrayal, it was fraud. I called Eric, my friend since college who worked as a notary public. We met at a coffee shop the next morning. I slid the documents across the table, and after 15 minutes of silent reading, he looked up and said, "You want me to help prove she faked this?" I nodded once. He leaned back and sighed. Done. By the end of the week, my lawyer had enough material to prepare a case of financial misconduct. The legal term was spousal dissipation of assets. In plain English, she'd broken the trust so thoroughly that a judge could move to freeze her access to our joint accounts. And that's exactly what we did. That evening, she went out for dinner with a friend. I moved our car, the one titled in my name, into my brother's garage, changed the registration to my LLC just in case. Then I waited. I knew what was coming. At 7:17 p.m., Rachel tried to pay for a bottle of wine and found her card declined. She tried again. Same result. Texts came next, and I let them sit, unread. I saw the notification that she left the cafe and stood outside for 20 minutes before calling a rideshare. When she got home, she stormed in. She didn't ask where Logan was. She didn't ask why I looked calm. She asked why her cards didn't work. I said nothing. I let the silence speak for me, like a final crack in the mask. And as she stood there, fuming and confused, I realized something. She had no idea that I'd only just begun. By midweek, the tension in our house had congealed into something dense and invisible, like a toxic fog. Rachel tiptoed through it, cautious but still arrogant enough to think she had control of the narrative. She tried to re-establish patterns, cooking dinner, planning family movie nights, even texting Logan midday just to ask how practice went. It was all a show, every gesture rehearsed and hollow. She was trying to reframe herself as the loving wife and mother. But the problem with pretending is that sooner or later, the mask slips. She still didn't know I had her entire digital trail copied and backed up in 3 different places. I didn't tell her I had proof of her signing the fraudulent mortgage documents. I didn't mention the audio file of her bragging to Alex about how slow I was to catch on. And I certainly didn't reveal that I'd been communicating with her employer's internal ethics division, anonymously of course, about possible conflicts of interest and unreported income. Instead, I agreed to dinner with her parents. We met at a quiet Italian restaurant, the same one where we'd celebrated Logan's last birthday. Rachel smiled too much. Her mother complimented the wine. Her father stayed quiet, as always. Before dessert, I slipped a USB drive into her father's coat pocket when I stood to go to the restroom. On that drive were everything I'd gathered: images, videos, message logs, bank transfers, recordings. It wasn't for revenge. It was for record. For when this all inevitably spilled into family court, and her parents would have to choose which version of Rachel they wanted to support: the daughter who lied and broke the law, or the one who played house until the foundation rotted. 2 days later, Rachel received an invitation from her aunt, a charity event, formal attire, live stream for a children's foundation. She was excited. I acted indifferent, pretending to be bogged down in work. I even offered to help her zip the dress she planned to wear. It was red, the same shade she had worn on that night we met. Fitting in a way, full circle, bleeding into betrayal. She left just after 6. By 7:30, I was sitting at my laptop watching the live feed. It started with an orchestra, some speeches, then the slideshow. They had planned a segment honoring families who had donated generously to the cause. Except this slideshow wasn't about donors. It was about her. It opened with a photo of Rachel and Alex smiling in a parking lot. Then came screenshots of their messages, laughing about my quiet cluelessness, planning how to sell the house, how to split the proceeds. She had even noted how to leverage Logan's schedule to sneak out more efficiently. Then the worst part, their conversation about naming children they might one day have. There were gasps in the crowd. Her aunt tried to cover the projector with her shawl. Her father got up and walked out without a word. The camera shook as someone cut the feed. I closed my laptop. The next day, I found Alex's truck parked near a park downtown. The passenger window was cracked open. I printed copies of Rachel's debt statement and stuffed them in the glove box dashboard, and under the seat. On the last one, I wrote in red ink, "Hope this is the future you plan for." I didn't damage the vehicle. I wanted him to think. Let paranoia take root. Let him wonder how deep I'd already reached into his world. After that, I posted an anonymous tip on a local financial forum, exposing a suspected case of financial misconduct and marital fraud tied to public grants and tax documents. I attached altered but authentic-looking excerpts from Rachel's falsified bank transactions. The post picked up steam overnight, and by morning, her company's compliance department had launched an internal review. Then came her diary. She always kept one, a leather-bound notebook she carried when traveling, supposedly for journaling. She kept it in a locked drawer in her home office, but the key wasn't hard to find, taped under a photo frame of our wedding. Inside, I found pages written in a slanted, hurried scrawl. She wrote about escaping the life she fell into, about how Alex made her feel like someone worth chasing, about the timing of transferring our remaining assets to a name listed only as JM. She feared the fallout if I found out, but wrote, "He never pushes back. He avoids conflict. He'll fold if I just keep calm." That phrase stuck with me. He'll fold. I photographed every page. That night we fought. It began over something stupid, Logan's school uniform not being dry, but spiraled quickly. I dropped her diary on the table. She froze. I hit play on my phone, her voice admitting the affair, laughing about Alex's plan to flip the house. Her reaction was instant. She lunged at me, eyes wild, trying to snatch the phone. I stepped back. She came again, faster this time. I turned and led her directly into the living room, where the second hidden camera was still rolling. She hit me across the shoulder. Hard. I let her. Then I pulled out the other phone and called the police. When they arrived, I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply handed over the recording and said, "She's emotionally unstable, and she's made financial decisions that threaten the stability of our home." One officer took her aside. Another stayed with me and Logan. I didn't want her arrested, but I wanted a record. I wanted documentation, something that would follow her into the courtroom. She was detained, just long enough for a report to be filed. 3 days later, I filed for restricted visitation rights, citing emotional volatility and ongoing fraud investigations. I didn't do it to hurt her. I did it to build the wall that would keep Logan safe, from her decisions, from her chaos, from the pieces of herself she gave away too freely. That weekend, I drove out to a cabin owned by my uncle, deep in the woods near the state border. No reception, no signal, just me and Logan. We chopped wood, skipped stones, and sat by the fire while I told him stories about when I was his age. I didn't tell him his mother had betrayed us. I didn't tell him that we were already halfway gone. But when he looked up at me, poked the logs with a stick, and asked, "Are we going to be okay, Dad?" I told him the truth. We're going to be better. The official paperwork came through on the last Tuesday of the month, a thick envelope of finalized asset separation, guardianship confirmation, and relocation approval. I held it in my hands as the sun leaked across our new kitchen's pale wooden floor. Logan was perched at the counter, his legs swinging beneath the bar stool as he poured too much syrup on a stack of pancakes we'd made together. He looked up at me with wide eyes and a messy grin, utterly unaware of the emotional battlefield those papers represented. We had done it. 2 weeks prior, I sold my business, a custom manufacturing firm I'd built from the ground up with a few close friends. The payout was enough to fund a complete relocation, a new house in northern Colorado, and seed money for a small investment, something local and modest, just enough to keep my hands busy and my mind from spinning in circles. The buyer was someone I trusted, and I remained a minority advisor. No headlines, no drama, just a clean exit. We'd been in Colorado for 6 days when Rachel's letter arrived. Not an email, not a message. A handwritten envelope tucked neatly among our forwarded mail. My lawyer had set up a redirection service to screen any correspondence, but this one, he said, was safe to receive. I almost didn't open it, but I did. It began with apologies, predictable, practiced. But near the bottom, just below a paragraph about how she missed Sunday mornings as a family, was a drawing. Not from her, from Logan. It was our house scribbled in bright blue marker, with 3 stick figures. Only 2 were labeled, me and Dad. The third had no name, but someone had written, "Please put me back in," next to it in a different pen. Her handwriting. I didn't call her. I didn't write back. I scanned it and passed it to my attorney. He archived it, along with the other 37 documents and communications Rachel had attempted to funnel through back channels. Emails, messages from family members, even a LinkedIn request under an alias. I didn't need to engage anymore. Instead, I focused on Logan. He adjusted faster than I expected. He made friends within the first few days at his new school, joined a local baseball league, and became obsessed with woodworking. That part surprised me, but also didn't. My father had taught me how to shape cedar into frames and shelves when I was Logan's age. Maybe it was something in the blood. I started teaching local kids basic carpentry out of the large shed behind our new home. It wasn't much. Weekend lessons, a few hand tools, nothing fancy. But word spread. Within weeks, I received a small grant from the town's youth initiative program, enough to expand the workshop, buy new materials, and build out the structure into something more formal. The satisfaction I felt sanding wood beside my son, watching him problem solve and laugh with other kids, filled spaces inside me that had been hollow for too long. In the evening, when the sun dipped behind the pine trees, I would paint. Small canvases at first, then larger ones. The subjects weren't subtle. Bridges aflame, doors unhinged, paths twisting through fractured forests. A local gallery owner saw one at a community fair and asked if I'd be interested in showing a collection. I agreed, not for the attention, but because each piece was a page from the chapter I was closing. Opening night arrived on a Friday. Logan helped set up, carrying frames under his arm, pretending he was the boss. He asked if we could get burgers after. I said yes. As the gallery filled with neighbors, visitors, and whispers, I slipped away to check my phone one last time before the event began. There it was, an old email address I hadn't used in months. A message from Rachel. Subject line: I know what I did. No apology, no plea, no long-winded explanation, just that line. I hovered over the screen for a moment, letting the words blur and refocus. Then I tapped archive and shut the laptop. Outside, Logan was calling my name. He'd built a small wooden fort in the backyard over the past 3 days. A hideout, he said, for when adults get too loud. He'd borrowed leftover boards and beams from the workshop and spent hours hammering away with the kind of intense focus only kids can muster. It was crooked, barely standing, but it was his. I stepped out onto the porch, leaving the phone behind. The air was crisp, the sky streaked in orange and pink. Logan's laughter echoed across the yard as he crawled into the tiny fort, waving for me to follow. I climbed in, knees scraping against rough plywood, and sat beside him in the dim wooden space that smelled of sawdust and pine. He looked up at me, blue eyes wide, and said, "I like it here. Can we stay forever?" I nodded, voice caught in my throat. "Yeah, bud, we can." We sat in silence for a long time, a silence full of peace, a silence earned. That's all for now, folks. Thank you for being with me today and listened. And if you liked my story, please subscribe, hit the like button, and comment below what you think about all this and what would you do if you were me. Also, don't forget to check my other stories in description below.